"Daddy, please don't sell me like I'm cattle at the market." Young Sarah May was begging on her knees in that muddy parking lot, clutching at the torn pants of the man who should have been protecting her. But he, with his eyes clouded by whiskey and his heart hardened by years of poverty, had already sealed the deal. $15,000 in cold cash changed hands in that dusty Texas roadside diner. What she didn't know was that the well-dressed man in the dark suit, watching her with kind eyes behind expensive glasses, was carrying a secret that would change not just her destiny, but heal his own heart wounded by a childhood of abandonment in the foster care system. Lord have mercy. Sometimes what looks like the end is just the beginning of a love story that not even the angels could have imagined. Now listen here, y'all. This story I'm fixing to tell you ain't pretty, but it's real as the red dirt under your fingernails. It happened down in rural Texas, where the summer heat beats down mercilessly and hope dies slower than a wounded animal. Sarah May Johnson was just 17, but Lord have mercy, that girl had already lived through more heartache than most folks see in a lifetime. She was barely surviving in what you might generously call a mobile home, a rusty death trap that reeked of mold, desperation, and broken dreams. Every morning at 5 a.m. sharp, she'd wake up on that torn-up sofa, her spine twisted in agony from the broken springs that stabbed through like rusty knives. The holes in the floor were so big, you could see straight through to the muddy ground underneath. And when storms hit, that trailer flooded like a sinking ship. "Get up, you worthless piece of trash." That was stepmother Jolene's daily wake-up. Call followed by whatever object she could throw. Empty beer bottles, dirty dishes, sometimes her own slipper. Jolene was pure evil wrapped in cheap perfume and spite. Your pathetic daddy's already crawled off to work like the failure he is. Sarah May would drag herself up, her ribs showing through her torn nightgown. She'd lost so much weight from barely eating that she looked like a scarecrow come to life. She'd learned to duck fast and keep her mouth shut. Speaking back meant worse punishment. The girl used to be beautiful, stunning even, with emerald green eyes that once sparkled with life, but years of starvation and cruelty had hollowed out her cheeks and dimmed that light to barely a flicker. Her golden hair, which Mama used to call sunshine itself, now hung in greasy tangles because there was rarely hot water for washing. Sarah May's real mama died when she was 12, not peacefully, but screaming in agony from cancer that ate her alive over 2 excruciating years. Sarah May watched her mama waste away to nothing, begging God every night to take the pain away. Before Mama died, she made Daddy swear on her deathbed, "Promise me you'll protect our baby girl, Johnny. She's all that's left of our love." That promise lasted exactly 4 months. Daddy took up with Jolene faster than vultures on roadkill. This woman didn't just dislike Sarah May, she hated her with a burning passion that would make the devil himself proud. To Jolene, Sarah May was competition for Daddy's attention and money, an obstacle to be destroyed. You eat whatever scraps. "Child left if there are any left," Jolene would snarl, deliberately throwing the best food in the trash while Sarah May watched, tears of hunger streaming down her face. Some nights there was nothing, absolutely nothing, and Sarah May would go to bed with her stomach cramping so bad she'd curl up like a dying animal. When she did get food, it was rotten leftovers, moldy bread, or table scraps that wouldn't even be fit for dogs. She grew so thin that her clothes hung on her like rags on a clothesline, but the physical hunger was nothing. Nothing compared to the soul-crushing emotional starvation. Sarah May was dying inside, piece by piece, day after day. She'd lie on that broken sofa at night, listening to Daddy and Jolene screaming at each other about money, about bills, about how Sarah May was eating them out of house and home when she barely ate at all. The worst torture was watching Daddy transform. From the loving father, she remembered into a stranger who looked right through her like she was invisible. Sometimes she'd catch him staring at their old family photo, the 3 of them at the county fair before Mama got sick, when they were actually happy. But then Jolene would snap her fingers like he was a trained dog, and that moment of recognition would die in his eyes. "That girl ain't worth the air she breathes," Jolene would hiss when she thought Sarah May couldn't hear. "She's dragging us down, Johnny. We need to do something about her." And Daddy, God forgive him, would just nod and reach for another beer. The breaking point came on Sarah May's 17th birthday. She woke up hoping, praying that maybe someone would remember. Maybe there'd be a cake, or even just happy birthday. Instead, Jolene made her scrub the entire trailer on her hands and knees while screaming that she was Another year closer to being worthless. That night, Sarah May cried herself to sleep, clutching the only photo she had left of her mama. She whispered to it, "Mama, I don't know how much more I can take. I'm disappearing, Mama, I'm just disappearing." It was that very night, as if summoned by her desperate prayer, that the black sedan appeared. Through the rain-streaked window, Sarah May saw him, a man in an expensive suit standing in their trashy yard, like he didn't belong to this world of pain and poverty. When their eyes met across that muddy distance, something passed between them. A recognition, a knowing. He touched his hat brim in respect, something no one had shown her in 5 long years. Sarah May had no idea that this stranger's arrival would either save her life or destroy what little was left of it, because sometimes, honey, when you're drowning in darkness, you can't tell if that hand reaching down is going to pull you out or push you under. Well now, what happened next would make your blood run cold as a January morning in the mountains. That mysterious man in the black sedan didn't just disappear into the night like Sarah May hoped he would. No, sir. He came back the very next day, and this time he brought something that would change that poor girl's life forever. A briefcase, full of cash. Johnny Johnson was sitting on the front porch nursing his 4th beer of the morning and staring at nothing in particular when that fancy car pulled up again. The man stepped out calm as you please, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Johnny made in 6 months at the packing plant. "Mr. Johnson," the stranger said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "I believe we need to have ourselves a conversation." Now, Johnny might have been a broken-down drunk, but he wasn't stupid. He could smell money on a man from a mile away, and this fella reeked of it. "What you want with me, mister?" Johnny asked, trying to sound tougher than he felt. "It's about your daughter," the man said simply. "I understand you've been having some financial difficulties." Inside the trailer, Sarah May was pressed against the thin wall, her heart hammering like a woodpecker on a dead tree. She could hear every word, and what she heard made her stomach drop like a stone in a well. "That girl ain't nothing but trouble." Jolene's voice cut through the morning air sharp as a razor. She'd appeared on the porch like a bad omen, her eyes gleaming with something that looked an awful lot like greed. "Eating us out of house and home, she is. Costing us money we ain't got." The stranger opened his briefcase, and even from where Sarah May was hiding, she could see the stacks of bills inside. More money than her family had ever seen in one place. "I'm prepared to offer you $15,000, he said quietly. "For what?" Johnny asked, though his voice was already changing, getting that hungry tone it got when he talked about his next drink. "For the girl." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Sarah May felt her world tilt sideways, like the whole trailer was about to slide off its foundation. Surely she'd heard wrong. Surely her own daddy wouldn't. 15,000, Jolene repeated, her voice breathless with excitement. "Cash money?" "Cash money," the stranger confirmed. Johnny was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah May found herself praying harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. "Please, God, please don't let Daddy do this. Please let him remember Mama's promise, please." But when Johnny spoke again, his voice was already defeated. "What you want her for?" "That's my business," the stranger said. "But I can assure you, she'll be well taken care of. Better than she is now." Jolene let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Well taken care of? Mister, you could throw her in a ditch and it'd be better than what she's got here." "Jolene," Johnny warned, but there was no strength in it. "Don't you Jolene me." "Johnny Johnson, that girl's been nothing but a burden since her mama died. Now here's someone willing to pay us good money to take her off our hands. It's like the good Lord himself sent us a miracle." Sarah May sank to her knees behind that paper-thin wall, tears streaming down her face like rain on a window. Her own. Daddy was actually considering this, actually thinking about selling her like she was livestock at the county fair. "I need to think about it," Johnny said finally. "Think about what?" Jolene snapped. "We got bills stacked up to the ceiling, the rent's 3 months behind, and you ain't worked a full week in 2 months. This here's our chance to get out from under all this debt." "She's my daughter," Johnny whispered, but even as he said it, the words sounded hollow. "She ain't been your daughter for years," Jolene shot back. "She's been a millstone around our necks, dragging us down further every day. Her mama's dead and gone, Johnny. Ain't no bringing her back. But we can make something good come out of all this misery." The stranger stood there patient as death, letting them argue it out. Sarah May could see him through the crack in the wall, and what scared her most was how calm he looked, like buying a human being was just another business transaction. "What? Say if I say no?" Johnny asked. Then you'll have missed the opportunity of a lifetime, the stranger replied, and I'll find another way to get what I want. Something in his voice made Sarah May's blood freeze. This wasn't just about money. This man wanted her specifically, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Give us till tomorrow, Johnny said finally. I need to sleep on it. The stranger nodded, closed his briefcase and tipped his hat. Tomorrow then. Same time. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the smell of expensive cologne. As soon as he was gone, Jolene turned on Johnny like a wildcat. Sleep on it, sleep on it? Johnny Johnson, you are the biggest fool God ever put on this earth. That man just offered us $15,000, $15,000, and you want to sleep on it? She's my blood, Jolene. My own flesh and blood. Your flesh and blood ain't gonna pay the bills. Your flesh and blood ain't gonna keep the lights on. That girl's gonna be 18 in a few months anyway. And then what? She'll leave us high and dry without so much as a thank you. Inside the trailer, Sarah May was dying a slow death. She could hear her daddy wavering, could hear the resolve crumbling in his voice like old plaster off a wall. Maybe it would be better for her, Johnny said quietly. Maybe she'd have a chance at a real life. That's right, Jolene purred, sensing victory. Think about it, Johnny. She could have pretty dresses, good food, a real bed to sleep in. We'd be doing her a favor. Sarah May wanted to scream, wanted to run out there and beg her daddy to remember who she used to be, who they used to be together. But she knew it was already too late. She could hear it in his voice. He'd already made up his mind. That night, Sarah May didn't sleep. She lay on that broken sofa, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was how her mama had felt when the cancer was eating her alive from the inside. Because that's what this felt like, being consumed by something. Dark and hungry until there was nothing left. Tomorrow her daddy was going to sell her. And there wasn't a blessed thing she could do to stop it. Sometimes, honey, the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest. And sometimes when you're drowning, even the devil looks like salvation. Lord have mercy. What happened the next morning would haunt Sarah May's dreams for years to come. She woke up before dawn, her body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, knowing this would be her last sunrise in the only home she'd ever known, broken and miserable as it was. Johnny was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. The empty whiskey bottle beside him told the story of how he'd spent the night. When he looked up at Sarah May, his eyes were red-rimmed and full of something that might have been regret, if it wasn't already too late for regret. Sarah May, he started, his voice cracking like old leather. I know, Daddy, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her breaking heart. I heard everything yesterday. Jolene came bustling out of the bedroom, practically glowing with excitement. She was wearing her best dress, the blue one with tiny flowers that she saved for church, and had even put on lipstick. You'd think she was going to a celebration instead of destroying a young girl's life. Well, Jolene said, looking Sarah May up and down like she was inspecting cattle. I reckon you ought to clean yourself up some. Make yourself presentable for your new arrangement. The way she said that word made Sarah May's skin crawl. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the Texas wilderness and never look back. But where could a 17-year-old girl with no money and no family go? She was trapped like a rabbit in a snare, and everyone knew it. At exactly 10 o'clock, that black sedan pulled up again. Sarah May watched from the window as the stranger got out, briefcase in hand, looking like death himself come calling. He was tall and lean with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. When he knocked on the door, it sounded like thunder in Sarah May's ears. Mr. Johnson, he said when Johnny opened the door, I trust you've made your decision. Johnny couldn't even look at his daughter. Yeah, he mumbled. We got a deal. The stranger nodded and opened his briefcase again. Those stacks of $100 bills seemed to glow in the morning light, and Sarah May watched her daddy's eyes get wide as saucers. $15,000 was more money than their family had ever seen. Before we finalize this arrangement, the stranger said, his voice calm as a preacher on Sunday, I need to speak with the girl, alone. Jolene started to protest, but one look from those cold eyes shut her up faster than a slammed door. The man turned to Sarah May, who was pressed against the wall like she was trying to disappear into it. Come here, child, he said, and though his voice was gentle, it wasn't a request. Sarah May's legs felt like jelly, but she managed to walk over to him on shaking knees. Up close, she could see that his expensive suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He smelled like money and power. Two things she'd never had and never would. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. Sarah May," she stammered. "Sarah May," he repeated, like he was tasting the words. "Do you know why I'm here?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Tears were already streaming down her face, and she hadn't even left yet. "And how does that make you feel?" The question caught her off guard. Nobody had asked how she felt about anything in years. "Scared," she whispered. "Real scared." Something flickered in his eyes, just for a moment, but then it was gone. "You should be," he said simply, "but not for the reasons you think." Before Sarah May could ask what he meant, Jolene came bustling over with a garbage bag stuffed full of Sarah May's few belongings. "Here's all her things," she said cheerfully. "Ain't much, but then again she ain't had much to begin with." The stranger took the bag without comment, then reached into his briefcase and counted out the money. Sarah May watched her daddy's hands shake as he took those bills, and she realized this was really happening. Her own father was actually selling. "Her daddy," she whispered, reaching out to him one last time. "Please don't do this, please. I'll be better, I promise. I won't eat as much, I won't take up space. Please just let me stay." Johnny looked at her then, really looked at her, and for just a second she saw the man he used to be, the daddy who used to push her on the swing, who used to call her his little princess. But then Jolene cleared her throat, and that moment was gone like smoke in the wind. "It's for the best, Sarah May," he said, but he couldn't meet her eyes. "This gentleman can give you things I never could." "I don't want things," Sarah May cried, her voice breaking. "I just want my daddy." But it was too late. The stranger took her by the elbow, gently but firmly, and guided her toward the door. Sarah May looked back over her shoulder, memorizing every detail of that broken-down trailer. It might not have been much, but it was all she'd ever known. "Don't you worry none about her," Jolene called out as they walked to the car. "She's always been a quiet, obedient girl. Won't give you no trouble at all." The stranger opened the passenger door of his sedan and gestured for Sarah May to get in. The leather seats were the finest thing she'd ever touched, but they felt like a coffin to her. As he started the engine, she pressed her face to the window and watched her daddy standing in the doorway counting his money. He never even said goodbye. As they drove away from the trailer park, Sarah May felt like she was dying inside. Everything she'd ever known was disappearing behind them in a cloud of dust. She was alone in the world now, completely at the mercy of this stranger who'd bought her like a piece of property. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engine. "Please don't hurt me." The stranger glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and for just a moment, his expression softened. "Child," he said quietly, "I'm not the one you need to be afraid of. The people who should have protected you, they're the ones who hurt you." Sarah May didn't understand what he meant, but something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. His hands on the steering wheel were steady and sure, but she noticed they were shaking just slightly. And when he turned to check his blind spot, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes that looked almost like pain. Who was this mysterious man? And what did he really want with a broken-down girl from a trailer park? "Sometimes, honey, the devil wears a suit and tie, but sometimes an angel comes disguised as your worst nightmare." Now listen here. What happened next would make you question everything you thought you knew about good and evil. As that black sedan rolled down the dusty Texas highway, Sarah May was curled up in the passenger seat like a wounded animal, every mile taking her further from the only life she'd ever known. The stranger, who still hadn't told her his name, drove in silence for near an hour. Sarah May kept stealing glances at him, trying to figure out what kind of monster she was dealing with, but every time she looked, she saw something that confused her more. His jaw was clenched tight, like he was fighting some internal battle, and his knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so hard. "Where are you taking me?" she finally whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Somewhere safe," he replied, but his voice sounded strained, like the words were hard to get out. "Safe?" Sarah May let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Mister, you just bought me like a piece of cattle. Nothing about this is safe." The car suddenly swerved to the side of the road, gravel crunching under the tires as he slammed on the brakes. Sarah May's heart nearly jumped out of her chest. This was it. This was where he showed his true colors. She pressed herself against the passenger door, ready to run if she had to, but when the stranger turned to look at her, she saw something that stopped her cold. There were tears in his eyes. Actual tears. "Child," he said, his voice breaking like her daddy's used to when he talked about Mama. "I need you to listen to me real careful like. I know how this looks, I know how scared you must be, but I swear on my mother's grave, I am not going to hurt you." Sarah May stared at him, not knowing what to believe. "Then why? Why did you buy me like I was nothing?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the endless Texas sky. When he spoke again, his voice was so soft, she had to lean forward to hear him. "Because, Sarah May, I was you once. A long, long time ago." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know what it's like to be thrown away like garbage by the people who were supposed to love you. I know what it's like to be hungry, scared, and alone in this world." He turned to look at her again, and in his eyes she saw a pain so deep it made her own suffering look small. "My name is William Cross, and I've been looking for you for a very long time." "Looking for me? But why? I ain't nobody special." William reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old yellowed envelope. With shaking hands, he opened it and pulled out a faded photograph. When he handed it to Sarah May, she gasped. It was a picture of her mama, her real mama, but she looked younger, maybe 17 or 18. She was standing next to a boy who couldn't have been more than 16, both of them smiling like they had the whole world ahead of them. The boy had the same eyes as William Cross. "That's my mama," Sarah May whispered, her fingers tracing her mother's face in the photo. "And that's me," William said quietly. "Your mama and I, we grew up together in the foster care system. We were both thrown away kids, and we promised each other that if we ever made it out, if we ever found success, we'd come back for the other kids like us." Sarah May felt like the world was spinning around her. But Mama never said, "Your..." "Mama kept her promise in her own way. She got out, found your daddy had you, made a good life for a while." William's voice got thick with emotion. "But I took a different path. I clawed my way out of poverty, built a business empire, made more money than I knew what to do with. But I never forgot that promise." "So you came back for me?" "I've been watching your family for years, Sarah May. Ever since your mama got sick, I've been trying to figure out how to help without making things worse. When she died..." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I promised her, on her deathbed, that I'd look after you if something happened to your daddy." Sarah May felt like she couldn't breathe. "You knew my mama was dying?" "I paid for her treatment, child, all of it. The doctors, the medicine, the hospital bills. Your daddy never knew where that money came from. Thought it was some kind of charity program." William's voice cracked. "But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough to save her. And Daddy doesn't know. Your daddy's a broken man, Sarah May. Grief and guilt ate him up from the inside, and that stepmother of yours preyed on his weakness like a vulture on roadkill. She's been poisoning him against you for years, telling him you weren't really his daughter, that you were the reason for all their problems." The pieces started falling into place like dominoes in Sarah May's mind. The way Daddy looked at her sometimes, like he was seeing a stranger. The way Jolene always had just a little too much information about their financial troubles. The way everything started falling apart so fast after Mama died. "So when you offered to buy me, I knew it was the only way to get you out of there before something worse happened. Jolene had been talking to some real bad men, Sarah May. Men who would have hurt you in ways I can't even say out loud." William's hands were shaking as he put the photograph back in the envelope. "I had to act fast." Sarah May felt like she was drowning in emotions. Relief, anger, confusion, hope. "But why didn't you just tell me? Why make it seem like..." "Because I needed your daddy to believe he was in control. If he thought I was some kind of savior, his pride would have made him refuse. This way, he thinks he made a business deal. His conscience might hurt, but at least you're safe." "Safe," Sarah May repeated, tasting the word like she'd never heard it before. "I've got a house outside Dallas, big place, quiet. You'll have your own room, your own bathroom, all the food you can eat, clothes that fit, books if you want to learn. And when you're ready, when you're old enough and strong enough, you can decide what you want to do with your life." Sarah May looked out the window at the endless Texas landscape, feeling like she was seeing it for the first time. The sun was getting low in the sky, painting everything golden, and for the first time in years she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. "Hope, Mr. Cross," she said quietly. "William, just William. William, what if I can't trust you? What if this is all some kind of trick?" William was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and gently took her hand, the first kind touch she'd received in 5 years. "Then you run, Sarah May. You run as far and as fast as you can, and you don't look back. But I'm betting that somewhere deep in that broken heart of yours, you know the truth when you hear it." As they pulled back onto the highway, heading toward a future Sarah May couldn't even imagine, she clutched that old photograph and whispered a prayer of thanks to her mama. Maybe, just maybe, the worst day of her life was about to become the first day of something better. But honey, even when salvation comes knocking, sometimes the hardest part is learning how to open the door. Well now, when they finally pulled up to William's house outside Dallas, Sarah May thought she'd died and gone to heaven, or maybe fallen into one of them fairy tales Mama used to read her. The place was bigger than the entire trailer park she'd come from, with white columns reaching up to the sky and gardens so perfect they looked like a painting. But as William helped her out of the car, Sarah May felt that familiar knot of fear tighten in her stomach. Beautiful things always came with a price, and she'd learned the hard way that nothing in life was free. "This is your home now," William said gently, carrying her pitiful garbage bag of belongings. "For as long as you want it to be." Sarah May followed him up the front steps, her bare feet silent on the polished wood. Inside, the house was even more overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and carpet so thick her toes sank into it like sand. "I've prepared a room for you upstairs," William said, leading her up a staircase that curved like something out of a movie. "It has its own bathroom, and I've taken the liberty of getting you some clothes. I hope they fit." He opened a door at the end of the hallway, and Sarah May's breath caught in her throat. The room was 3 times bigger than the entire trailer she'd shared with Johnny and Jolene. There was a real bed, not a broken-down sofa, but an actual bed with a headboard and everything, covered in a quilt that looked like it had been made by angels. But instead of feeling grateful, Sarah May felt panic rising in her chest like floodwater. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, backing toward the door. William stopped in his tracks and she saw something flash across his face. Hurt, maybe, or recognition. "Nothing, Sarah May. I want nothing from you except for you to be safe and happy. Nobody does something like this for nothing," she said, her voice getting higher and more desperate. "What's the catch? What do I have to do to earn all this?" William sat down heavily in a chair by the window, suddenly looking every one of his 50-odd years. "You know what the worst part about being thrown away as a child is?" he asked quietly. "It's not the hunger or the cold, or even the beatings. It's learning that love always comes with conditions, that kindness is just another word for manipulation." Sarah May stared at him, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his words. "I was 8 years old when my mama dropped me off at the state. Home," William continued, his voice distant and hollow. "She told me she'd come back for me when she got on her feet. That was 42 years ago, and I'm still waiting." He looked up at Sarah May with eyes full of understanding. "So I know why you can't trust this. I know why kindness feels like a trap." "Then why?" Sarah May asked, tears starting to flow again. "Why are you doing this?" "Because your mama asked me to. Because I promised her I'd look after you if something happened. And because—" He paused, struggling with the words. "Because maybe if I can save you, it'll make up for all the times nobody saved me." That night, Sarah May lay in that beautiful bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling more alone than she ever had in the trailer. The sheets were softer than anything she'd ever touched, but they felt foreign against her skin. The room was warm and clean, but it didn't feel like home. It felt like a prison made of silk and good intentions. She could hear William moving around downstairs, and every sound made her flinch. When was he going to show his true colors? When was the kindness going to turn into something else? Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway and sat up in bed, her heart hammering. But the footsteps paused outside her door and then moved on. A few minutes later, she heard William's door close at the other end of the hall. The next morning, Sarah May crept downstairs to find William in the kitchen, making breakfast. Real breakfast. Eggs and bacon and toast, not the scraps she was used to. The smell made her stomach growl so loud it echoed in the big kitchen. "Good morning," William said, not turning around. "I hope you slept well." Sarah May didn't answer. She was too busy staring at the plate he set in front of her, more food than she usually saw in a week. "Go ahead," he said gently. "Eat." But Sarah May just sat there, paralyzed. What if this was a test? What if he was waiting to see how greedy she was? What if eating too much meant punishment later? William seemed to understand her hesitation. He sat down across from her with his own plate and began eating quietly, not pushing or demanding anything from her. Finally, Sarah May picked up a piece of bacon with shaking hands and took a tiny bite. It was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Over the next few weeks, a strange routine developed. William would leave early for work, and Sarah May would wander around the big house like a ghost, touching things carefully and waiting for someone to tell her she didn't belong. In the evenings, they'd eat dinner together in relative silence, both of them carrying too much pain to know how to make normal conversation. But slowly, small cracks began to appear in the walls they'd both built around their hearts. When a thunderstorm hit one night, William found Sarah May curled up in the hallway closet, shaking like a leaf. Instead of asking questions, he just sat down beside her and waited out the storm in silence. "Jolene used to lock me outside during storms," Sarah May finally whispered when the thunder stopped. "Said if I was gonna act like a dog, I could stay outside like one." William's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping, but his voice stayed gentle. "You're safe now. No one's ever going to hurt you like that again." "You don't know that," Sarah May said. "You can't promise that." "You're right," William admitted. "I can't promise the world won't hurt you, but I can promise that I won't. And I can promise that as long as you're under my roof, you'll never go hungry or cold or scared again." It was the first promise anyone had made her in years that felt like it might actually be true. But just when Sarah May was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a safe harbor in this storm-tossed life, the phone rang. William answered it in his study, but his voice carried through the house like thunder. "What do you mean she's been talking to reporters?" he was saying. "How much does she know?" Sarah May crept closer to the study door, her heart sinking as she heard William's voice get harder and more worried. "Find out what she wants," he said finally, "and find out how much it's going to cost to make this go away." When he hung up the phone, Sarah May was already backing away from the door, her mind racing. Who was he talking about? What did someone know? And what was he willing to pay to keep secret? Sometimes, honey, just when you think you've found your safe place in this world, the past comes knocking with a bill that's going to cost more than money to pay. Now, honey, what happened next would make the angels themselves weep with sorrow. Sarah May spent that whole night tossing and turning in that beautiful bed, William's mysterious phone conversation playing over and over in her mind like a broken record. Who was talking to reporters? What secrets was he hiding? And Lord have mercy, what had she gotten herself into? The next morning, William was gone before she woke up. No note, no explanation, just an empty house that suddenly felt more like a tomb than a home. Sarah May wandered from room to room, that familiar fear creeping back into her heart like poison ivy, spreading through a garden. It was around noon when the phone rang, shrill and demanding in the silence. Sarah May stared at it for 3 rings, before finally picking up, her hand trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Well, well, well," came a voice that made her blood run cold. It was Jolene, and she sounded drunk as a skunk and twice as mean. "If it ain't little Miss High and Mighty herself." "Jolene," Sarah May whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's right, sugar. Your loving stepmother. You remember me, don't you? The woman whose life you made miserable for all them years." Sarah May's legs gave out, and she sank into William's leather chair, the phone cord stretching taut. "How did you get this number?" "Oh, honey child, you'd be surprised what people will tell you when you wave enough cash in their faces." And speaking of cash, Jolene's voice turned vicious. "You want to know what your precious daddy did with all that money your sugar daddy paid for you?" "Don't," Sarah May whispered, but she knew Jolene wasn't going to stop. She never did. "He blew every last penny at the Indian casino. Sugar. Every last penny. $15,000 gone in 2 nights of poker and whiskey. And you know what? The best part is, he was bragging about it to everyone who'd listen, telling folks how he finally got rid of his worthless daughter and made himself rich in the process." The words hit Sarah May like physical blows, each one driving the knife deeper into her already wounded heart. She could picture it so clearly. Daddy at that seedy casino, drunk and wild-eyed, throwing away her worth like it was monopoly money. "You're lying?" Sarah May managed to choke out. "Am I? Well then, you just call Murphy's Bar and ask them about Johnny Johnson. Ask them about how he stood up on a table Tuesday night, waving $100 bills around, telling everyone how he sold that burden and was finally free." Sarah May doubled over in pain, the phone slipping from her hand, but she could still hear Jolene's poison pouring out of the receiver. "He called you a burden, sugar. His exact words, said you weren't worth the food you ate or the air you breathed. Said the best thing he ever did was get $15,000 for something that wasn't worth 15 cents. Sarah May grabbed the phone back, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you telling me this? Why do you want to hurt me more than you already have?" "Because, little Miss Princess, I want you to know exactly what you are. Nothing. You're nothing, and you always have been. Your own daddy couldn't wait to get rid of you, and whatever sick game this William Cross is playing, it ain't gonna last forever. "What do you know about William?" Sarah May asked, something cold and terrible settling in her stomach. Jolene's laugh was like broken glass. "Oh, I know plenty. See, I've been doing some digging on your new benefactor. Turns out, Mr. William Cross ain't quite the saint he pretends to be." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about his business, sugar. All them companies he owns, all that money he made. Some folks are saying it didn't all come from honest work. There's rumors, honey, dark rumors about where his money really comes from." Sarah May felt the world spinning around her. "You're just trying to scare me." "Am I?" "Well, you just ask him about them shipping containers that come through his warehouses at night. Ask him about the cargo that doesn't appear on any official manifest. Ask him why he's got connections to some very dangerous people." "Stop it," Sarah May whispered, "and ask him why he really wanted you, sugar. Because I got a feeling it ain't out of the goodness of his heart. Men like that don't spend $15,000 on charity cases unless they expect to get their money's worth." The line went dead, leaving Sarah May alone with the terrible silence and Jolene's poisonous words echoing in her head. She sat there for what felt like hours, her mind reeling with horrible possibilities. When William finally came home that evening, Sarah May was sitting in the living room, still as a statue. He took one look at her face and knew something was terribly wrong. "Sarah May, what's happened?" She looked up at him with eyes that had lost all their newfound hope. "Tell me about your business, William. Tell me where your money really comes." From something flickered across his face, so quick she almost missed it, but it was enough. Enough to confirm her worst fears. "Who have you been talking to?" he asked quietly. "It doesn't matter. Just tell me the truth, please. After everything you said about honesty and trust, just tell me the truth." William sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly together. "Sarah May, there are things about my life, about my business, that are complicated. Things I can't explain. Can't or won't. Both," he admitted, and she saw the admission hit him like a physical blow. "There are people I work with, deals I've made that I'm not proud of, but everything I told you about your mother, about wanting to help you, that was all true." Sarah May stood up, backing away from him like he was a dangerous animal. "How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? How am I supposed to know what's real and what's just another lie?" "Because you know me," William said desperately. "These past weeks you've seen who I really am. Have I? Or have I just seen what you wanted me to see?" Sarah May's voice broke. "Daddy sold me to you for $15,000, then went and gambled it all away while bragging about getting rid of his burden. And now I find out that maybe you're not the savior you pretended to be either." The pain in William's eyes was unmistakable, but Sarah May was too hurt to care. "Sarah May, please." "No," she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by heartbreak and rage. "I've been lied to and used and thrown away by everyone who was supposed to care about me. I won't be anybody's victim anymore." That night, Sarah May packed her few belongings back into that same garbage bag, her heart breaking all over again. She'd thought she'd found safety, maybe even a family, but she should have known better. In this world, people like her didn't get happy endings. They just got different kinds of pain. Sometimes, honey, the cruelest wounds are the ones that come just when you thought you were finally healing. And sometimes, the people trying to save you are drowning in their own dark waters. Well now, what happened next would break your heart into 1,000 pieces and make you question everything you thought you knew about redemption. Sarah May slipped out of William's house like a ghost in the night, clutching that garbage bag of her worldly possessions, determined to disappear into the Texas darkness rather than be anybody's fool again. But Lord have mercy, the world outside. That safe haven was colder and crueler than she remembered. With nowhere to go and only $17 to her name, money she'd found in an old coat pocket, Sarah May found herself wandering the streets of Dallas like a lost soul, sleeping in doorways and eating whatever scraps she could find. Meanwhile, back in that trailer park that seemed like a lifetime ago, Johnny Johnson was discovering that making deals with the devil always comes with a price higher than you're willing to pay. It had been 2 weeks since he'd taken William's money, and every last cent was gone, disappeared into the electronic slot machines and poker tables of the Riverside Casino, like morning mist in the Texas sun. But worse than being broke was the emptiness that was eating him alive from the inside out. Johnny sat in Murphy's bar, the same bar where he'd bragged about selling his daughter, staring at an empty whiskey glass and seeing his wife's face reflected in the amber bottom. Mary Ellen's eyes were full of disappointment, and he could hear her voice as clear as if she was sitting right next to him. "You promised me, Johnny Johnson. You promised you'd take care of our baby girl." She ain't here no more, Mary Ellen, Johnny whispered to the ghost that haunted every corner of his mind. I sold her. I sold our little girl like she was cattle. The bartender, a grizzled old man named Murphy who'd seen more broken souls than a preacher, slid another whiskey across the scarred wooden bar. You've been talking to yourself for 3 days straight, Johnny. Maybe it's time to go home. Home? Johnny laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. What home? Jolene took off with that drug dealer from Austin, cleaned out what little we had left in the bank account, took my truck too, left me with nothing but a note saying I wasn't man enough to keep her satisfied. Johnny pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, Jolene's goodbye letter, and read it for the 100th time. The words were like salt in an open wound. You're pathetic, Johnny. A broken-down drunk who sold his own daughter for gambling money. Don't come looking for me, we're done. But even Jolene's betrayal wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the looks he got from folks around town, neighbors who used to nod politely now crossed the street to avoid him. The story had spread like wildfire. Johnny Johnson sold his daughter to a stranger and gambled away the money. What kind of man does that? He heard Mrs. Patterson whisper to her friend at the grocery store. What kind of father sells his own? Flesh and blood. Johnny didn't have an answer because he was asking himself the same question every waking moment. The guilt was eating him alive, gnawing at his insides like a cancer. He'd wake up screaming Sarah May's name, drenched in sweat and haunted by nightmares where she was calling for him to save her. 3 days after Jolene left, Johnny found himself standing outside the Riverside Casino at 3 a.m., staring up at the neon lights and remembering the moment his life completely fell apart. He'd been on a winning streak that first night. Pocket aces, full houses, chips stacking up like his prayers had finally been answered. This is it, Mary Ellen, he'd whispered to his wife's memory. This is how I'm gonna make everything right. But gambling addiction is like a hungry beast. The more you feed it, the hungrier it gets. One good night turned into 2 bad ones, then 3, then a week of chasing losses with more losses, until that $15,000 was nothing but a bitter memory. Now Johnny was homeless, jobless, and completely alone. The trailer park had evicted him for non-payment, and he was living in his car. Except Jolene had taken that too. So he was sleeping in the park, under bridges, anywhere he could find shelter from the Texas heat and his own crushing shame. It was during one of these sleepless nights, huddled under a highway overpass with nothing but a bottle of cheap wine for company, that Johnny finally hit rock bottom. He pulled out the only photo he had left of his family, him, Mary Ellen, and little Sarah May at the county fair, and started talking to it like it could hear him. I'm sorry, baby girl, he whispered, tears streaming down his unshaven face. Daddy's sorry for everything. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know how I became this monster. A group of other homeless men had gathered around a trash can fire nearby, and one of them, an old preacher named Reverend James who'd lost his church to his own demons, overheard Johnny's broken confessions. Son, Reverend James said gently, ain't no shame in hitting bottom. The shame's in staying there. I sold my daughter, Johnny sobbed. My own little girl. What kind of man does that? A broken one, the Reverend replied. But broken don't mean beyond repair. I seen men come back from worse than this. Not from this. Never from this. You'd be surprised what God can forgive, son. Question is, can you forgive yourself? That conversation planted a seed in Johnny's whiskey-soaked brain. Over the next few days, he found himself attending meetings at the community center, Alcoholics Anonymous sessions, led by folks who'd been where he was and somehow found their way back to the light. The first time, Johnny stood up and said, My name is Johnny Johnson, and I'm an alcoholic who sold his daughter. The room went dead silent, but instead of judgment, he saw understanding in those weathered faces. These people knew about rock bottom. They knew about shame so deep it felt like drowning. The first step, said a woman named Patricia who'd been sober for 15 years, is admitting what you've done. The second step is deciding what you're going to do about it. Johnny started writing letters, page after page of apologies and explanations that he never sent. How could he? He didn't even know where Sarah May was, and after what he'd done, he had no right to ask. But the hardest part of his new sobriety wasn't the physical withdrawal or the meetings, or even the crushing guilt. It was the night he dreamed about Mary Ellen, and she wasn't disappointed anymore. She was sad, heartbreakingly, soul-crushingly sad. Find her, Johnny, Dream Mary Ellen whispered. Find our baby girl and make this right. It ain't too late. It's never too late to choose love over fear. Johnny woke up with tears on his face and a determination in his heart he hadn't felt in years. He might not be able to undo what he'd done, but maybe, just maybe, he could start trying to make it right. But first, he had to find Sarah May, and that meant swallowing his pride and asking William Cross for help. Sometimes, honey, a man's got to crawl through hell on his hands and knees before he remembers what it feels like to stand up and be human again. Well, now what happened next would test every ounce of faith you ever had in the power of human redemption. Johnny Johnson stood outside William Cross's mansion like a broken-down scarecrow, his hands shaking from 3 weeks of sobriety and his heart hammering with the weight of what he had to do. The security guard at the gate looked at this disheveled man with suspicion. Johnny's clothes were dirty and wrinkled, his face gaunt from not eating regular meals, and his eyes held the haunted look of a man who'd seen the bottom of his own soul. "Sir, this is private property," the guard said, his hand moving toward his radio. "Please," Johnny's voice cracked like an old leather boot. "I need to speak with Mr. Cross. It's about Sarah May Johnson. It's about my daughter." The guard's expression shifted slightly. William had left strict instructions about anyone asking about the girl. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into his booth to make a phone call. 10 minutes later, William Cross himself appeared at the gate, and Johnny barely recognized the man who'd bought his daughter. William looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. His face was drawn, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes held a desperation that Johnny understood all too well. "Where is she?" William demanded before Johnny could even speak. "Where's Sarah May?" Johnny's heart sank like a stone in deep water. "You mean she ain't here? She ran away 3 weeks ago, the night after someone filled her head with lies about my business, about why I wanted to help her." William's eyes bored into Johnny's soul. "Someone called her, told her things. Was it you?" "No, sir, it was Jolene, my ex-wife. She was trying to hurt Sarah May, trying to—" Johnny's voice broke completely. "Mr. Cross, I ain't slept a full night since I took your money. I ain't had a moment's peace since I sold my baby girl like she was livestock." William studied this broken man before him, seeing something in Johnny's eyes that he recognized, the kind of regret that eats you alive from the inside out. "Come inside," William said quietly. "We need to talk." They sat in William's study, two men who'd both failed the same young woman in different ways. Johnny looked around at the expensive books and furniture, thinking about how Sarah May had lived in this luxury while he was gambling away her worth. "I've had private investigators looking for her for 3 weeks, William said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey and offering one to Johnny, who shook his head. "She's like a ghost. No credit cards, no bank accounts, no fixed address. It's like she vanished into thin air." "She's good at disappearing," Johnny said softly. "Always was. Even as a little girl, when things got bad, she'd find ways to make herself invisible." He pulled out that old family photo, now wrinkled and stained from being carried everywhere. "This is what she used to be like, before I broke her spirit, before I became the kind of man who could sell his own child." William looked at the photo, really looked at it, seeing the resemblance between the laughing little girl and the broken teenager he'd tried to save. "Tell me about her mother," he said. "Mary Ellen was everything good in this world. Patient, kind, loving. She saw the best in everyone, even in me." Johnny's voice got thick with memory. "When she was dying, she made me promise to take care of Sarah May. And I did for a while, but after the funeral I couldn't look at that girl without seeing Mary Ellen. Every time Sarah May smiled, every time she laughed, it was like a knife in my heart." "So you let Jolene poison you against her?" "I let Jolene poison me against everything. Against my own daughter, against my own life. I started drinking to forget the pain, and the more I drank, the easier it became to believe Jolene's lies. That Sarah May was a burden, that she was the reason we couldn't move on." William leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "The night I took her, she begged you not to go through with it. She got down on her knees in the mud and begged you to remember who she was." Johnny doubled over like he'd been punched in the stomach. "I know, God help me, I know, I can still hear her voice. I hear it every night when I try to sleep." "Then why?" William's voice was harsh with his own pain. "Why did you do it?" "Because I'm a coward," Johnny whispered. "Because $15,000 seemed like enough money to drink away all my problems. Because I convinced myself that you could give her a better life than I ever could." He looked up at William with tears streaming down his face. "But mostly because I was already dead inside, and dead men can't love anybody." The two men sat in silence for a long moment, both of them carrying the weight of their failures. "I need you to know something," William said finally. Everything I told Sarah May about knowing her mother was true. Mary Ellen and I grew up together in foster care. We were both throwaway kids, and we promised each other we'd never let another child go through what we went through. Then why didn't you just adopt her legally? Why the money exchange? Because I knew you'd never let her go willingly, and she was 18 months away from aging out anyway. I thought if I made it look like a business transaction, you'd feel like you were still in control. I thought it would be easier for everyone. Johnny nodded slowly. And the rumors about your business? William was quiet for a long moment. I've made some questionable deals over the years, done business with people I'm not proud of knowing, but I swear on your wife's grave, I never intended to hurt Sarah May. I just wanted to give her the childhood I never had. And now she's out there somewhere thinking the worst of both of us. I've got people looking, but she's smart, too smart. She knows how to stay hidden. William ran his hands through his hair. I'm scared she's going to get hurt or worse. A 17-year-old girl alone on the streets. We'll find her, Johnny said with a determination that surprised them both. I don't care if I have to walk every street in Texas. I'll find my daughter, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I'd done. William looked at this broken man who was trying to put himself back together and made a decision that would change all their lives. There's something else you need to know, William said. I've been paying off debts you didn't even know you had. Jolene got you into some serious trouble with some dangerous people who would have killed you for what you owed them. Johnny stared at him in shock. What are you talking about? She was stealing from you, Johnny, for months, taking money from your account, running up credit cards in your name, borrowing from loan sharks. The $15,000 I paid you, half of it went to keeping you alive. The revelation hit Johnny like a freight train. All this time he'd thought he was just a gambling addict who'd betrayed his daughter, but he'd also been a victim of Jolene's manipulation. She set me up, he whispered. She set you both up, you and Sarah May, and now we're all paying the price. Sometimes, honey, the devil doesn't come at you with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes he comes wearing the face of someone you trust, whispering poison in your ear until you can't tell right from wrong anymore. Lord have mercy. What happened next would make the heavens themselves weep and the earth tremble with the power of human redemption. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when God himself seemed to orchestrate the events that would bring this broken family back together, but not before putting them through a trial by fire that would test every ounce of strength they had left. William and Johnny had been searching for Sarah May for 2 weeks together, hitting every shelter, every soup kitchen, every place where lost souls go to hide from the world. Johnny's hands were raw from passing out flyers with his daughter's picture, and William's expensive suits had been replaced with worn jeans and work shirts as they walked the mean streets of Dallas. She's out here somewhere, Johnny would whisper to himself as they checked another empty lot, another abandoned building. His sobriety was being tested every day by the crushing weight of not knowing if his little girl was safe, warm, or even alive. Meanwhile, Sarah May had been surviving like a ghost in the shadows of the city. She'd learned to sleep in 24-hour laundromats, to find food in dumpsters behind restaurants, to make herself invisible when dangerous people came prowling. Her beautiful blonde hair was now cut short and dyed black, with cheap drugstore color, and she wore oversized men's clothes to hide her figure. The girl who'd once dreamed of being a teacher now spent her days trying not to be seen, trying not to think about the warm bed she'd left behind, or the 2 men who'd both claimed to care about her. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. But that Tuesday evening, as storm clouds gathered over Texas like God's own warning, the universe decided it was time for truth to come to light. Sarah May was huddled in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Dallas when she heard voices, familiar voices that made her blood run cold. I'm telling you, she's been spotted in this area, came Jolene's voice, sharp and cruel as ever. That little brat's been hiding somewhere around here. Sarah May pressed herself against the concrete wall, her heart hammering like a woodpecker on a dead tree. Through a crack in the boards, she could see Jolene talking to 2 men she didn't recognize, rough-looking characters with tattoos and cold eyes. You sure she's worth all this trouble? One of the men asked. She's worth whatever that rich boy will pay to get her back, Jolene replied. And if he won't pay, well, there's other markets for pretty young girls like her. The words hit Sarah May like physical blows. Jolene wasn't just trying to hurt her. She was planning to sell her again, this time to people who would do unspeakable things. Sarah May's survival instincts kicked in and she started moving toward the back exit of the warehouse. But as she crept through the shadows, her foot caught on a piece of broken glass, and the sound echoed through the empty building like a gunshot. What was that? Jolene snapped. Sarah May ran. She ran like her life depended on it, which it did, bursting out of the warehouse and into the storm that was just beginning to unleash its fury on the Texas landscape. Rain hit her face like bullets, and lightning split the sky as she raced toward the main road. Behind her, she could hear Jolene shouting orders, the sound of vehicles starting up, the beginning of a chase that would either end in her freedom or her destruction. Meanwhile, across town, Johnny and William were sitting in William's study when the emergency alert came across every phone, radio, and television in Dallas County. Tornado warning, seek immediate shelter. Large tornado on the ground moving toward metropolitan area. Dear God, Johnny whispered, looking out at the apocalyptic sky. She's out there in this. William was already grabbing his keys. Come on, if there's a tornado coming, she'll head for the only shelter she knows. What shelter? The community center where you go to your AA meetings. It's the only public building in the area with a storm shelter, and she's smart enough to know that. They drove through streets that looked like the end of the world, trees bending sideways in the wind, debris flying through the air like missiles, emergency sirens wailing like banshees. The tornado was a massive, dark funnel cloud that seemed to fill half the sky, and it was heading straight for the heart of Dallas. At the community center, dozens of people were crowding into the basement storm shelter, families with children, elderly folks from the nearby nursing home, anyone who didn't have a safe place to ride out the storm. And there, pressed against the far wall like a cornered animal, was Sarah May. She looked up when Johnny and William stumbled down the stairs, and the expression on her face went from hope to fear to anger in the space of a heartbeat. No, she whispered, backing further into the corner. No, I won't go back. I won't be anybody's property anymore. Johnny felt his heart break all over again, seeing his daughter so thin, so frightened, so broken by what life had done to her. Sarah May, baby girl, don't you call me that, she screamed, and the whole shelter went quiet despite the roar of the storm above. You sold me. You sold your own daughter like I was cattle. The tornado chose that moment to pass directly overhead, and the building shook like it was going to come apart at the seams. People were crying and praying, children were screaming, and through it all, Johnny crawled across the concrete floor toward his daughter. You're right, he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. I did sell you. I sold my own flesh and blood, my own baby girl, because I was weak and scared and broken inside. Sarah May stared at him, seeing for the first time how much weight he'd lost, how gray his hair had become, how his hands shook from more than just fear of the storm. I killed your mama, as sure as if I'd put a gun to her head, Johnny continued, tears streaming down his face. Not with cancer, that wasn't my fault. But I killed her memory, I killed her love. I killed everything good she'd left in this world when I chose whiskey over you. Stop, Sarah May whispered, but Johnny wasn't done. I let Jolene poison me against you because it was easier than admitting I was too much of a coward to be the daddy you deserved. I convinced myself you'd be better off without me. But the truth is I couldn't stand to look at you because you reminded me of everything good I'd thrown away. William knelt down beside them, his own voice thick with emotion. And I lied to you too, Sarah May. Not about knowing your mama, not about wanting to help you, but about my business. I have made deals with dangerous people. I have done things I'm not proud of, but everything I felt for you, everything I wanted to give you, that was real. The tornado was moving away now. The building had stopped shaking, but the three of them were caught in their own storm of emotion and truth. I don't know how to trust anybody anymore, Sarah May sobbed. I don't know how to believe in anything. Good? Then don't trust us, Johnny said, reaching out slowly to touch his daughter's face for the first time in months. Trust this. I have spent every day since I took that money wishing I could die from the shame of it. I have prayed every night for God to give me just one chance to make it right. And I've spent every day since you left looking for you, William added. Not because I own you, not because you owe me anything, but because you're the closest thing to family I've ever had. Sarah May looked back and forth between these two broken men, one who'd thrown her away and one who'd tried to save her, and saw something she'd never expected to see. She saw genuine love, flawed and imperfect, and scarred by terrible mistakes, but real nonetheless. Jolene, she whispered suddenly, remembering the danger. She's looking for me. She's got men with her, and they want to hurt me. Johnny's face went hard as stone. Where? The old warehouse district. But Johnny, these men are dangerous. They're not just after money. "Let me worry about that," William said grimly. "I know how to deal with dangerous men." As they climbed out of the storm shelter into a world transformed by the tornado, trees down, buildings damaged, power lines sparking in the streets, Sarah May realized that the real storm had been inside all of them. And maybe, just maybe, they'd weathered it together, but their reunion would have to wait. Somewhere out in the tornado-ravaged city, Jolene was still hunting, still scheming, still trying to destroy what little family they had left. Sometimes, honey, it takes a storm from heaven to wash away all the lies and leave nothing but the truth. And sometimes the truth is the most beautiful and terrible thing you'll ever see. Well now, what happened in the days following that tornado would prove that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from the darkest soil. And sometimes love has to be tested by fire before it can truly shine. The confrontation with Jolene came sooner than any of them expected. 2 days after the storm, as Dallas was still cleaning up the debris and counting its blessings, Jolene made her move. She'd been watching William's house, waiting for the right moment, and when she saw Sarah May step out onto the front porch to get some fresh air, she struck like a snake. Well, look what we got here," Jolene said, stepping out from behind William's expensive car with those same 2 rough men flanking her. "Little Miss Princess, living the high life while her poor old stepmother suffers." Sarah May's blood turned to ice, but she didn't run. Something had changed in her during that night in the storm shelter. Some kind of strength she didn't know she possessed. "What do you want, Jolene?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "What I've always wanted, sugar, to get rid of. You once and for all, but this time I'm going to make a real profit doing it." Before Sarah May could react, William appeared in the doorway, and Johnny was right behind him. But what shocked everyone was that William wasn't alone. He had 3 men with him, who looked every bit as dangerous as Jolene's companions. "Jolene Parker," William said, his voice calm but deadly. "I was wondering when you'd show your face." "William." "Cross?" Jolene replied with a smile that could curdle milk. "I see you're still collecting strays, and I see you're still destroying everything you touch." What happened next unfolded like a chess game played with human lives. Jolene's men moved to flank the house. William's men countered. And in the middle of it all stood Sarah May, Johnny, and William, a family trying to protect itself from the poison that had been eating at its heart. "So you want the girl?" Jolene called out. "Fine, but it's going to cost you $100,000 or I take her with me right now." "You're not taking her anywhere," Johnny said, stepping protectively in front of his daughter. For the first time in years, he looked like the man Mary Ellen had fallen in love with, strong, determined, and ready to fight for what mattered. "Oh, look at this," Jolene laughed. "The drunk has grown a spine. Too bad it's about 5 years too late." That's when the situation exploded into violence. One of Jolene's men made a grab for Sarah May. Johnny threw himself in the way, and suddenly fists were flying and grown men were fighting like their lives depended on it. But in the chaos, something beautiful happened. Sarah May saw her father, this broken-down man who'd sold her for gambling money, take a punch that would have knocked her to the ground. She saw him get back up, blood streaming from his nose, and throw himself at the man who was trying to hurt her. Nobody touches. "My daughter!" Johnny roared. And in that moment, Sarah May saw the daddy she remembered from before Mama died. The fight ended when William's men proved to be more professional than Jolene's thugs. Within minutes, Jolene and her companions were face down on the ground, hands zip-tied behind their backs, waiting for the police that William had already called. But as the sirens grew closer, Jolene looked up at Sarah May with pure hatred in her eyes. "This ain't over, girl. You think you've won something, but you ain't won nothing. You're still the same worthless piece of trash you always were." That's when Sarah May did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She knelt down beside Jolene and looked her straight in the eye. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "I was never worthless. You just needed me to believe I was so you could control the people who loved me. But I'm done believing your lies." Jolene's face twisted with rage, but before she could respond, the police arrived and took her away. As the squad cars disappeared, down the road, Sarah May felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for years. In the weeks that followed, the 3 of them began the long, painful process of healing. Johnny started going to AA meetings twice a day and got a job at a construction company. Honest work that left his hands calloused, but his conscience clear. He moved into a small apartment across town and began the slow process of earning back his daughter's trust. William used his connections to make sure Jolene faced serious charges for her trafficking plans. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, and for the first time since Mary Ellen died, Sarah May felt truly safe. But the most beautiful part of their healing wasn't the big gestures, it was the small ones. Johnny started writing Sarah May letters, not asking for forgiveness but just telling her about his days, his struggles, his small victories in staying sober. Sarah May kept every one of those letters, reading them over and over, watching her father slowly become human again. William enrolled Sarah May in private school and watched with quiet pride as she threw herself into her studies with the hunger of someone who'd been denied education for too long. She discovered she had a gift for mathematics and science, and her teachers said she was the most determined student they'd ever seen. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after that terrible night when Johnny had first agreed to sell his daughter, the three of them sat together in William's living room. There was a fire crackling in the fireplace, snow falling outside the windows, and presents under a tree that sparkled with lights. "I got something for you," Johnny said to Sarah May, pulling out a small wrapped box with shaking hands. Inside was a simple silver locket, not expensive, but beautiful in its simplicity. When Sarah May opened it, she found a picture of her mother on one side and a picture of the three of them from that day at the county fair on the other. "I found it in a pawn shop," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was your mama's. I sold it during one of my bad times, but I've been saving up to buy it back for months." Sarah May fastened the locket around her neck and felt her mother's presence as real as if Mary Ellen was sitting right there with them. "I got something for both of you," Sarah May said, pulling out 2 envelopes. Inside were letters she'd written, one to Johnny, one to William, expressing forgiveness and love in words that came straight from her heart. "I'm not saying I've forgotten everything that happened," she said, as they read through tears, "but I'm choosing to remember the love instead of the pain, because that's what Mama would have wanted." William wiped his eyes and pulled out his own gift, adoption papers that would make Sarah May legally his daughter, giving her his name and his protection forever. "Only if you want it," he said quickly. "I know Johnny's your real daddy, and I would never try to replace that, but I want you to know that you'll always have a home with me no matter what." Sarah May looked at Johnny, who nodded through his tears. "He's right, baby girl. You deserve all the love this world can give you. And William's been more of a father to you than I ever was." "No," Sarah May said firmly. "You've both been my fathers in different ways. Johnny gave me life and taught me how to survive. William gave me hope and taught me how to dream. I need both of you." That night, as they sat by the fire sharing stories and laughter, Sarah May realized something beautiful. She wasn't the same broken girl who'd been sold in a diner parking lot. She wasn't the frightened teenager who'd run away into the storm. She was someone new, someone stronger, wiser, and more loving than she'd ever imagined she could be. Years later, when Sarah May graduated valedictorian from high school and got a full scholarship to college, both Johnny and William were there, cheering her on. When she became a social worker dedicated to helping children in foster care, they both knew that Mary Ellen's spirit lived on in her daughter's compassionate heart. And when she eventually married a good man who loved her fiercely and had children of her own, she made sure they knew the story of how their grandmother Mary Ellen's love had saved not just one broken family, but had rippled out to touch hundreds of other lives. Because, honey, that's the thing about love. It never really dies. It just keeps growing, keeps healing, keeps turning pain into purpose and suffering into strength. And sometimes the most broken people become the most beautiful.